For you the fourth installment of my book entitled Sir, We Found Your Dog, the story of Trent Stephen Schmidt. Part 2, Chapter 1, Infancy. In November of 1974, my wife and I lost a child through miscarriage. Our oldest son, Todd, had been born on May the 6th, 1972. He was a very easy child, both in pregnancy and development. He was good-natured, bright, cheerful, and we looked forward to expanding our family with another child, hopefully a little girl. While we were courting, Wendy and I had planned to have the quintessential nuclear family with 2 children, a boy and a girl. We had even picked names for them, Todd and Lisa. Later, after we married and I learned Wendy was pregnant, I brashly predicted that our first pregnancy would result in a male child. These were the days before ultrasound and learning the gender of your child before it was born. I was so adamant about us having Todd that all the gifts that were given to us for our baby shower were little boy gifts, wrapped in blue and addressed by this name. Miscarriages can be emotionally devastating, and Wendy was very depressed as a result. Being a young husband, I didn't know exactly how to console her, but I did my best to reassure her that she was not a failure and that my love for her was unchanged. As a pastor, I suggested to her that this was a life experience that could turn out for our benefit. I opined that there was a high likelihood that during the course of our ministerial service there would be other women who would suffer so, and she would be qualified to express sympathy and other consolation based on her own loss. But this wasn't enough for her. In late February 1975, I traveled to Fort Worth, Texas to visit a pastor friend of mine who was very well known and eminently successful. I hoped to glean ideas and initiatives to bring home to our congregation so it would grow and be just as successful as Truth Tabernacle. I fasted the entire week without food, only water, and spent long periods in prayer. I was grateful to my hosts, David and Joy Wright, for their hospitality. David had been my music director and voice teacher while I attended Texas Bible College, but now he was leading the vibrant program of Truth Tabernacle as an associate of Dr. Mark Hanby. When I returned the 1st of March, Wendy was eager to try to grow our family again. Her sadness seemed to have morphed into a resolve to become pregnant as soon as she could, erasing the memory and disappointment of the miscarriage. We had agreed to use birth control at the beginning of our marriage so that we could manage and plan our family, but we soon learned she was extremely fertile. Each time she stopped taking birth control, she immediately became pregnant. Our hope was to space our children about 3 years apart based on information we'd gleaned from our college training in child developmental psychology. In this, we were successful. In short order, Trent was conceived, and whereas Wendy's pregnancy with Todd was a very easy pregnancy, this one turned out totally different. With Todd, Wendy could eat almost anything without cravings, moving, sitting, and lying as she pleased. With this pregnancy, however, she would sit on the front steps of our home eating lime jello and watching Todd play in the grass. She craved lime jello. She also craved radish sandwiches and White Castles. She could hardly get enough. This fetus was also very active and rambunctious. Wendy sang in the church choir and stood in the front row of the soprano section, and later in the pregnancy it was not uncommon for her maternity top to bounce and pop as the baby dug in its fists and heels into the walls of her tummy, flipping and turning with such energy. This was also a long-term pregnancy and a very large fetus. By the last month, the weight of the baby and its pushing and movements had taken their toll. The ligaments in my wife's body were stretched and pulled, causing her excruciating pain, and near the end I carried her in my arms from place to place because she could not walk. Our doctor predicted the baby would be about 7 pounds, but it came a month late and was 9 pounds 12 ounces. As the birthing process was moving forward, the baby was turned wrong and became stuck in the birth canal. This was horrifying to watch as the doctor attempted to turn the baby. Wendy was in such distress that I feared I was going to lose both mother and child in death. At one point I turned away to pray and was actually bumping my head against the wall of the delivery room, expressing my anxiety. Wendy's often looked back at these moments and laughed at those desperate feelings. The delivery lasted about 3 hours, and it took almost that long for the doctor to tend to Wendy. While this was all going on, our son was very active in the heated bassinet in the delivery room. He was so large and strong that, to the amazement of all of us, he was actually able to turn himself over. At his first feeding, he gulped down a 3-ounce bottle of formula and was so fussy the nurse and Wendy both agreed he was still hungry. After another ounce, he finally settled down to sleep until his next feeding. At 1 month, in order to satisfy him, Wendy started adding a little rice cereal to his formula. The second Sunday following Trent's birth, the first Sunday she was hurting too badly and couldn't walk, Wendy proudly brought our new infant to church. Everyone was so happy, and Wendy basked in the compliments heaped upon this new child. We were blessed to have an older couple, Harry and Thelma Clampett, in charge of our church nursery. They doted on all the babies in their charge, and since Wendy played the organ for services, she left our child in their charge, saying, "He may be big, but he's very delicate." All through his life, Trent combined big bluster with a certain degree of delicacy that endeared him to everyone who came to know him. This motherly observation turned out to be prescient, because although he was strong, he was delicate. A couple more observations from his infancy come to mind. Many children love fruit cocktail and especially find the bright red cherries delightful. As a little boy myself, I know how I wanted to be the one who got those 1 or 2 cherries that were in every can, but he didn't want them. He couldn't stand them. He would spit them out no matter what we did to disguise them or sneak them past his lips. He always rejected them. We never did learn whether it was the taste, the texture, or what, but this was true his entire life. Another food he could not tolerate was mushrooms. He declared he would never permit fungus to cross his lips. Another characteristic of Trent that was unlike our other children was his projectile vomiting. We were not prepared for this until it happened. Wendy was sitting on about the 4th pew back, and a beautiful Christian, Lena Earl, was sitting 2 rows in front of her. Suddenly, without warning, Trent hurled over the intervening pew on the back and shoulders of Lena. You can imagine the hubbub that ensued, and that story was told over and over. But you can imagine how proud we were when he was walking at 8.5 months. Like every other parent, our crow was the blackest, you know. As Mother saw it. It was so true that I was obsessed with getting pregnant again. I was positive I knew when the baby was due, somewhere around Halloween. However, in the fall of 1975, October came and went, and I was getting as big as the proverbial house and still no baby. He was happy where he was, I guess. I've had to repent and apologize to God because of what I said one of those nights when I was 9.5 months along. I looked up at the big harvest moon and brashly declared, "The Bible says you've suffered in all points such as we, but I don't remember reading you ever being 9.5 months along and miserable." God was merciful and forgave me, but the baby still didn't arrive for 2 more weeks. Thank God for the drugs they give you during delivery. I knew Trent wasn't cooperating, and I was for sure the doctor was doing everything he could. Apparently, Trent was locked in the birth canal face up, and Dr. Small was trying to turn him with nothing working. All of a sudden, it felt like Trent put his feet against my ribs and shoved, and there he was, screaming, entering the cold, cruel world face up. I was exhausted and ready for a nap. When we came home the Saturday after Thanksgiving, I decided Trent and I would remain on the first floor because I didn't have the strength to climb the 16 steps to our bedroom. I slept in the living room couch and thought he'd sleep with his bassinet next to me, but not so. Trent wouldn't settle down until he was lying across my chest and could hear my heartbeat. When I finally did take him to church, he let me know that he did not like the break from routine. Without fail, for the first 3 months, he wouldn't go to bed without being rocked and sung to. He'd fidget for 20 to 30 minutes every time. Delicate? Yes. Spoiled? No doubt. Trent didn't seem to be satisfied with just the formula I was feeding, no matter how many ounces, so Within a week of coming home, I decided to add a bit of thin rice cereal to his soup bottle. I knew babies weren't supposed to be eating cereal until 2 to 3 months at the earliest, but that seemed to be the only way he was satisfied. Trent loved it, but I was worried for years I'd messed up his digestive system. As the years unfolded, however, I knew I hadn't. I loved feeding him his Gerber blueberry buckle, but if he hesitated to open his mouth, I ate it. That is good stuff. Trent met his milestone accomplishments early, but I maintain he was a month old at birth. You should have seen how long his nails were at birth. He was in need of a trim that first week. In his own words, first memories are among the most deceiving things in the entire universe. We have all at one time or other strained our minds to recall our earliest memories. I've heard people remember many things I don't think they could possibly remember, though there are those who have memories from the womb and their birth. And don't try and tell me that's impossible. I think many people have heard certain stories so many times in their life they assimilate it into their memory, and it's borrowed. They actually think they've remembered the event. If someone were to ask Jack what his first memory was, he would have no problem recalling it. He was certain it was a legitimate memory because he remembered certain details that were never shared with him growing up. He was still in a crib when the events surrounding his first memory happened. He could remember the wood paneling in the room. He could remember the crazy blue blankets in the bunk beds in the corner of the room. These are the details that his family confirmed later when he was trying to decide if this was actually his memory or a story he'd heard too many times. His family moved out of that house before he was 2 years old. One night, Jack was awakened to terrible screaming. When he heard it frightened him terribly. He heard those loud thwack noises coming from his parents' bedroom across the hall. His crib was right next to the door, and their bedroom door was directly across the hall, so this smacking sound echoed and reverberated all around his tiny enclosed universe. After each thwack, he could hear his mom let out a blood-curdling scream. That was even more traumatic to him, and he began to scream. He was screaming out of fear. He was screaming to try to drown out the terrible noise. He was screaming from a desire to save his mom from whatever torture she was enduring. He was screaming out of frustration from not being able to do anything about what was echoing in his little head. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, his mom came to the room, tears coming down her cheeks. She said Dad had been beating her with a paddle for some unknown reason. Jack remembered looking up from that crib. He remembered the tears on his mother's face. He remembered the tilt of her head as she leaned over the crib and looked down at him. He remembered how the light from the hallway seemed to make her face glow and her dark brown eyes burn, and he could remember telling her he was going to kill Dad for what he had just done. This was Jack's first memory. And he found out later it was all a hoax. His father had been beating the bed with a paddle, and after each thwack his mom would let out the scream. It took a long time for Jack to banish his murderous thoughts. I encourage you to look for this book on Amazon. Sir, We Found Your Dog.